This is the Real Estate Guide to Success video series. I'm here with Ronnie Adams.
All right.
And I'm Vance Poindexter. This week we're going to be talking about your real estate investing goals and their life cycle. When you first start off in real estate investing, your goals are one thing.
Yeah.
But as you progress and you get more experience and you get more knowledge, you get more money, they change.
They change.
So there's a life cycle to what your goals are and how you run your business as you progress. We're going to talk about that today. So talk to me about your goals when you first started, how much you wanted to make, what you thought, I want to have one home. I'm happy with one home. Or if it's whatever it was in the beginning.
And this is really funny because I could bring a friend of mine who he tells me, he's like, Ronnie, I remember when you said, if I could just get 10 properties. Only thing I need is 10. I don't need nothing more. Just give me 10.
So that's what you were
he
first
said,
starting.
That's when I first started. I was like, if I can get 10, then I did something. I almost reached my goal at that point.
Was that based on how much money you wanted to make? Or
you know what? Back then, I didn't even think about that.
I want 10
I just want 10. Well, you know what? You have to think about this too. I was a teacher. I was bringing home maybe... It wasn't even $4,000 a month, at that time, so we're going back 20 years.
20 years, yeah.
So 10 properties would have made that for me.
Okay.
So I was making enough that I could have stopped teaching.
You wanted to place your current income.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at. I said, just do that. Like you said, your life cycle, even if everything that has a life cycle, it starts somewhere. It goes to another point, and it evolves. It changes. So it's the same thing with this.
After you got, your first couple properties, I know you struggled with a few of them, and you had to learn a few things along the way. But at what point did you say, okay,
this is
10 is not, this is working. Number one,
and
two, maybe I don't want 10, I want more. And why'd you come to that?
By the time that I actually, because the first 4 were the hardest, because I didn't do them the way I probably should have. They worked, but I didn't. It was a better way to do it. So by the time I got to the 5th one, it's like, ooh, this is a lot different. You're making good money. Okay. So of course you get to the 6th, the 7th, the 8th. By the time I got to the 10th one, it was so easy because I had learned a lot, and then you don't want to stop because now the money's coming, So, back then, by the time that I got to my 10th one, and we don't talk a whole lot about how much money that I actually made per unit or whatever. Only reason being is because it was a different time. Yeah. And I don't want people to think, okay, well, it's not like you can't, but, it's more important the technique than the money. Right. To be perfectly honest with you, if you do what you're supposed to do in your business well, the money will come. So don't worry about that. But back then, I was buying a property, taking a loan, and keeping $10,000 in my pocket. And I was doing one a month. So now I'm doing $10,000 a month. Right. So why do you stop? I was looking for the next month. As a matter of fact, I started blowing money because I was like, oh, the next month's coming. Don't worry about it. Because I had 3 properties ahead of me. There wasn't that many people buying them back then for some reason, And, we did a podcast on, how do you find properties or whatever. You look every day. My realtor, who I was real cool with, he said, Ronnie, you know why you still find properties where other people say that they can't? I was like, and we was about to walk into a property that I still own today, and he said, because you look every day. Right. I said, oh, so that's the whole thing. If you do something and you plan for it, then you're going to be successful. That's the bottom line. After
the first 4 or 5, where you made sufficient mistakes to be able to learn from those things. Yeah. The 5th through 10th,
they started getting a little bit easier. Yes.
So at some point, you decided to take it to a whole other level.
And it wasn't I evolved to that. It wasn't like I thought about it in the beginning. I really didn't. 10 was cool. Right. But after I got past that 10, I said, you know what? I learned that renting 10 properties or renting 50 properties, there's no difference. You have to have the same people in place.
Process.
Yes. To be able to rent 10 properties, there's no different than renting 40, 50, 100. There's really no difference at that point.
There were some differences in how many loans you could get with
that's the
banks. There were some obstacles along the way.
Let's not get it twisted. We still had problems. We still had things to do, as I would say. But the management of the properties, it really didn't change. I think that I learned that managing 20 properties is easier than managing 3. It's easier than managing 5.
Why?
Because 5 properties, if one person doesn't pay, now you have a money issue where you have to take some of your personal money to be able to, front that other property. But once you made it to 10, then generally I never had 4 properties vacant. I would always have maybe 1 or 2. You know what I mean? 2 pretty much at the most. So once I got to 10, then the other 8 took care of the 2 that were vacant. Once you get to 20, it still was the same 2.
Right.
You just continued making money. Now that I get to where I am now, I could have 3, 4 properties vacant and not really kill me.
That's because the cash flow and profit from the, say, 17 that you are renting will cover the time that you're not having a renter for those other ones.
Yes, because you're making enough money. I mean, when I was at 40 properties, I could have 6 of them vacant. The other 36 or whatever, 35, 4, they took care of it.
Gotcha.
So I didn't have to take out, and that's the biggest problem. The biggest problem is money. That's your biggest headache. Your biggest headache is when something breaks, I got to come out with cash to fix it. When somebody doesn't pay, I got to come out with cash to be able to put them out. Everything is about the money. When the money is not as much as a issue for you anymore, then some of your headaches go away.
Well, let me ask a question about that. You keep X amount of security deposit for each property so that you can cover certain things like that.
Yeah.
When you have 20 or 30, I'm assuming that you have a good... Can you use that security deposit?
Here's what now, I'm going to talk about New Jersey. The security deposit generally is supposed to go into a escrow account. So then that person... You're not using that person's escrow for someone else.
Just want to make sure.
But if you did use that person's escrow for something else, or you did not put it in an interest-bearing account, it's not against the law not to do it. But let's say I took your rent. I took your security deposit. I put your money into an interest-bearing account, and you didn't pay. And then I put an eviction in on you. Then you go to court and say to the judge, I want to be able to use my security deposit to pay the back rent that I owe Mr. Adams. If that money is in an interest-bearing account that had both of our names on it, then you would not be able to use that. I could say no. And then I could put you out anyway. But if I did not have that money in an interest-bearing account, then you could ask to use it. I would have to allow you to use it. And then I would not be able to charge you another security deposit as long as you was there. Wow. See what I'm saying? So it's not like you don't. Now, here's what you can do. You can kind of play the dozen and say, I'm not going to put anybody's money in the interest-bearing account. But once they say they have to use it, I gotta give it to them. But I'll be able to use that nest egg for other things.
I see.
If
you don't put it into that.
If you don't put it into that interest, and there's nothing illegal about that. No, you don't have to do it, but you have to allow them to use it. And don't not have the money. Don't go out to dinner and then that person asks for their security deposit, and then you can't give it, because then they could charge you. If they have a halfway decent lawyer, they could charge you double their security deposit. So you have to watch that.
Okay. So now that we've gone through the first couple stages in the life cycle, we get to the end where you have multiple. You have 20, 30, 40 properties. And I know, recently we've talked about how you actually said to me, I don't want any more properties.
Yeah, I don't. You know what? To be
and that's so That sounds so crazy to a beginning investor. That, you don't want any more money coming in.
Explain
that. And
well,
why
you know what?
case?
You start looking at, you get bored. I kind of got a little bit bored where I say, okay, I made good money, but the entrepreneur, the real entrepreneur, we don't care how we make money. We make money from real estate. We make money from selling hot dogs. It's not about how we make money. It's just the game to see if we can.
Right.
That's what it really is. That's the drive, So once I got to the point where I didn't have to do anything anymore. I mean, literally, while everybody is at work, I'm riding around like, I can buy another property, but I really don't need another property. And it's kind of a catch-22 because you get content. And you find that you don't grow, and when you don't grow or you're not aspiring to be more than what you are, then there's always a problem that could pop up, like the crash of 2006, and you would never think that something like that would happen, and it could set you back major. Where you could say, okay, if I'd have kept going, then it would have been a little bit better, or I'd moved to something else. So it really just got to the point where, for me, it got to be a little bit boring, so I wanted to move on to some different avenues or whatever like that.
So you're not saying abandon
No.
You need to be kind of actively working that. But you may also want to get into some other things. Continue to challenge that entrepreneurs.
Yes. And that's where you really have to figure out what you are. Right. And this is like in our ebook, we talk about your mindset. Yeah. We talk about planning. Your mindset, really, you have to figure out who you are and what's your personality. What makes you happy? What makes you tick? So when I got to a certain amount of properties, I said, well, I'm fine. I pay all my bills. I can, whatever. My lifestyle is fine. Do I want to buy another 30? Well, the market changed a little bit. I really don't want to, So I'm going to keep what I have. I'm going to tighten them to be able to suck as much money out as I can. And those things will always be there. I have children, so I can keep them for them. At some point they'll be paid off, and then you pretty much, you have to look at what you have to plan for. What is your lifestyle after you're gone, for your kids if you have them? So you have to plan all of that, I do have some people, financial advisors, that come to me and say, oh, you need to plan for this and that. I'm like, I already plan for that. What I mean? So that's what you're really looking at. But it does change. Your life cycle does change.
So we went through pretty much a number of years of goals and the whole life cycle plan of a real estate investor. As you can see, you start at kind of, focused individual goals, and it grows and grows and grows. And hopefully, if you're sticking with us and you're taking in the information that Ronnie's providing, you'll get to the end where you don't really need any more.
You really don't need any more. And if you keep on going and keep on pushing and keep on tuning in, then you will get there. Right. If I got there, they'll get there.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, Ronnie.
All right.